The pen trembled in Allara Bennett's hand as she folded the letter in 2/3. The paper crinkled, a small sound that somehow felt like thunder in the silence of the darkened apartment. Her black and white maid's uniform clung to her body, soaked through with sweat and rain that had fallen hours ago on Amsterdam Avenue. Outside the window, the city hummed with the electric buzz of neon signs cutting through the humid August darkness. The air was thick enough to taste, thick enough to choke on. "I'm writing this letter so you'll understand why I had to disappear." The words stared back at her from the page. "Because loving you means keeping you alive." She placed the envelope on the kitchen table. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to press them flat against the worn laminate to make them still. In the bedroom down the hall, her daughter Ava slept, small and fragile as a bird with a broken wing. The cardiologist's words echoed in her mind like a curse that could not be erased. $65,000. 5 days. Without the surgery, the doctors had been clear, there would be no more birthdays after this one. Allara had exactly $2 in her pocket. 2. Not 2,000. Not 200. $2.53 in coin scattered at the bottom of her bag. The sound of an engine cut through the night. Not the sound of a regular car. The deep, measured rumble of something powerful. A convoy. She moved to the window, careful not to let the curtain move, careful not to be seen. 3 black SUVs pulled onto the street below, their headlights cutting through the darkness like blades. They stopped in front of the building. Men in tailored suits emerged, moving with the practiced precision of soldiers. At the center of them stood a man she had seen only once before, 5 days ago on a rain-soaked highway when her delivery truck had died in a sudden storm and his convoy had found her there, soaked and desperate and broken on the shoulder of the road. Nicholas Romano. The most feared crime boss in New York. 5 days before Nicholas Romano would step out of that SUV, Allara Bennett stood in the humidity of the late-night diner on Amsterdam Avenue, nursing stale coffee with her last $2. The checkered floor, black and white like a chessboard, reflected the hum of dying neon lights that buzzed against the August darkness outside. The smell of grease and old coffee hung heavy in the air, mixing with the antiseptic burn of the cleaning chemicals she had used during her shift. Her maid's uniform was wrinkled, stained at the collar where sweat had soaked through for the 3rd shift in a row. Her feet throbbed in shoes with holes worn through the soles. She had taken the insoles from an older pair and laid them, but it was not enough. Nothing was ever enough anymore. The waitress walked past without making eye contact. Allara had worked with her for almost 2 years, but there was a distance now, a kind of pity mixed with something sharper, something like disgust. The woman knew. Everyone knew. A mother who could not afford to keep her daughter alive was not someone people wanted to look at for too long. She pulled the crumpled foreclosure notice from her bag and unfolded it on the table. The paper was soft from being folded and refolded, the words almost worn away by her own repeated reading, as if staring at them long enough might change their meaning. 30 days to vacate the premises. Your landlord, Tyler Brennan, has initiated proceedings to reclaim the property. Any rent owed will be collected, with late fees applied. Late fees. As if she had somehow chosen not to pay. As if the choice belonged to her at all. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother in Florida, who could barely afford to feed herself. A message from Ava's school saying there was a permission slip needed for a field trip. A notification from her bank that her balance was insufficient. She had been charged $3.50 for the privilege of not having enough money. The coffee was cold. It had been cold for 20 minutes. She drank it anyway. You're the maid from that building on the Upper East Side, right? Allara looked up. A woman was sliding into the seat across from her, uninvited. Sophie Langford. Allara knew the name because Sophie was one of the people who employed her, or rather, who employed the cleaning service that Allara worked for. Sophie was the kind of wealthy that did not announce itself. She wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Allara's rent. Her hair was perfect. Her nails were perfect. Everything about her was the opposite of Allara's existence. I clean your building, Allara said carefully. Third shift, Thursdays. Sophie smiled. It was not a kind smile. My mother mentioned you. Said you were very thorough. That you cleaned around her jewelry, never touched anything. Very honest for someone in your situation. The word hung in the air like a blade wrapped in ice. Situation. As if Allara's desperation was a choice she had made, a life she had selected from a menu of options. I do my job, Allara said. I'm sure you do. Tell me, how is your daughter? Ava, isn't it? Sophie was still smiling. My mother said you mentioned her once. That she was sick. The coffee tasted like metal in Allara's mouth. She had never mentioned Ava to anyone at any of the buildings she cleaned. She was careful about that. She did not talk about her daughter to the wealthy people whose homes she entered and exited, whose garbage she took out, whose floors she scrubbed on her hands and knees. I don't discuss my personal life, Allara said. Of course not. You're discreet. That's admirable. But I imagine it must be difficult. Medical bills are so expensive. Heart conditions especially. I was reading about them recently. The surgery, if I recall correctly, can run anywhere from $60,000 to $70,000. Allara did not move. She did not speak. She just sat there, frozen. Sophie leaned back in her chair. Your landlord is a friend of mine. Tyler Brennan. We talk sometimes. He mentioned that you were falling behind on rent. He said you had been making some interesting proposals about how you might make up the difference. The words landed like a punch. Allara's hands gripped the edge of the table. What do you want? Allara's voice was barely a whisper, trembling like a candle in the wind. I want nothing from you, Allara. I just wanted you to know that I was aware of your circumstance. That there are people who are paying attention. That your choices are being observed. Sophie stood up. She placed a card on the table. If you ever decide that you need help, call me. I know someone who might be interested in your situation. She walked out of the diner without waiting for a response. The bell above the door chimed. Outside, the rain had started to fall again. Allara sat in her car, which was not really her car anymore. The bank owned most of it. The engine made a sound like something grinding to a halt. The delivery job, the only job besides cleaning that paid anything close to real money, was in danger. The truck was breaking down more and more. Soon she would lose it entirely. She had not eaten. She had not slept. She had simply driven back and forth across the city, checking her phone for messages from the hospital, for news about the surgery, for anything that might change the impossible mathematics of her situation. The storm came suddenly, as August storms do in New York. One moment the road was visible. The next, the world was water and wind and thunder rolling across the sky like the voice of God announcing her failure. The delivery truck's engine ceased. Just stopped. The sound of something breaking was final, mechanical, absolute. She turned the key. Nothing. Turned it again. Still nothing. The rain hammered against the windshield. The wipers struggled against the onslaught, back and forth, an exhausting rhythm that matched the pounding of her heart. She pulled to the shoulder of the highway, her emergency flashers blinking red through the curtain of water. Her phone had 1% battery. No signal. She sat with her hands on the steering wheel and let herself cry, finally, after weeks of holding it together for Ava's sake, after weeks of smiling and cleaning and pretending that everything was fine when everything was catastrophically, irreversibly broken. A vehicle slowed beside her. Not a police car. Something bigger. Black. The window of the SUV rolled down smoothly, powered and quiet as a whisper. The man inside was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvered slightly at the temples. His tailored black suit was open at the collar, showing the muscled chest of someone who had survived hard things. But it was his eyes that stopped her cold. Dark, penetrating, like storm clouds before they break. A silver scar ran from his left eye to his cheekbone, dividing his face into before and after, marked and unmarked. "You need help," he said. It was not a question. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, like something carved into stone. She shook her head. She did not want help from strangers. She did not want to be seen like this, broken down on the side of a highway, crying like a helpless child. "Your truck is not starting," he said. "You are alone. It is dark. It is raining. You are wet. You need help." There was no mercy in his voice, but there was also no cruelty. He was simply stating facts the way the cardiologist had stated facts. Surgery required. $65,000 required. 5 days remaining. These were the conditions of reality. "I don't have money to pay for a tow," Allara said. He did not respond. Instead, he gestured, and a second vehicle pulled forward. 2 men emerged, moving with practiced efficiency, assessing the truck with the precision of soldiers evaluating a battlefield. They hooked it up without speaking to her, without asking permission, as if her situation had already been decided by forces beyond her control. "Get in," the man said. The second SUV pulled open and a third man appeared, reaching toward her with a towel and a bottle of water and an expression of perfect blank professionalism. "I don't even know you," Allara said. "No," he agreed. "You don't. But my name is Nicholas Romano. And in a few hours, you will understand why that matters." He did not explain further. He did not try to reassure her. He simply waited, patient as stone, while she gathered her belongings and moved into the warmth of his vehicle, out of the rain, into something she could not have predicted and could not have prepared for. The vehicle pulled onto the highway. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside, she was dry and warm, and for the first time in weeks, she was not completely, utterly alone. The black and white checkered floor of Sal's diner stretched out like a chessboard of decades-old stains, each tile sticky with the residue of spilled syrup and burnt grease that no amount of mopping could erase. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sickly yellow-green glow that made the 3 a.m. darkness outside look merciful by comparison. The August heat clung to every surface despite the struggling air conditioning unit rattling in the window like a dying animal, and the smell, coffee gone stale hours ago, bacon grease turned rancid, the ghost of 1,000 cigarettes from before the smoking ban, hung in the dead air like a curse. Allara Bennett sat alone in the corner booth, still wearing her maid's uniform from the hotel shift that had ended at midnight. The grey polyester clung to her skin, damp with sweat and humidity, the name tag reading housekeeping, Allara faded from 1,000 washings. She was 28 years old, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone who had lived 50 years in poverty's relentless grip. Dark hair pulled back so tight it made her temples ache, sharp cheekbones that spoke of skipped meals, fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that had gone cold an hour ago. On the table in front of her sat 2 crumpled dollar bills and 73 cents in loose change. $2.73. This was everything. This was the entire distance between her and complete financial obliteration. The foreclosure notice lay next to the change, its edges already soft from being folded and unfolded 100 times in the last 6 hours. The letterhead read Brennan Properties Management, and the words were printed in official black ink that seemed to grow darker each time she looked at it. 72 hours to vacate the apartment or pay 3 months back rent totaling $4,800. 72 hours. She had already spent 70 of them. Ava would need surgery in 5 days. Her daughter was 6 years old, and her heart was dying. The cardiologist had said the word valve and the phrase congenital defect and then the number that had destroyed her world, $65,000. The hospital had rejected the payment plan. No insurance would cover it. The waiting list for charity care was 2 years long. Ava would not survive 2 years. The hotel manager had approved 2 weeks of double shifts, but 2 weeks would only bring in $600. Even if she took a second job, even if she stopped sleeping, she could not earn $65,000 in 5 days. The mathematics of it was cruel and absolute, like a blade wrapped in ice. Tyler Brennan had made his offer clear this morning, his liver-spotted hands closing around her arm in the hallway of the condemned apartment building he owned. He was in his 60s, bloated with age and cruelty, his breath smelling of whiskey and rot. Rent could be paid in other ways, he had said. His fingers had tightened on her skin. She could wear the short skirt he liked. She could visit his office after the other tenants had gone. She could understand that nobody was going to save her, that gratitude required repayment, that she was lucky he was even willing to negotiate. She had pulled away from him and said nothing. Saying nothing was safer than saying no. The diner clock showed 3:19 in the morning. In 13 minutes, she needed to leave this booth, return to her apartment to shower and change clothes, and report to Pinnacle Delivery Services at 4:15 a.m. for her second job. 4 a.m. to 1 p.m. 9 hours of driving a 15-year-old truck that coughed and sputtered and had a check engine light that had been permanently illuminated for the past 3 years. The light was orange, like a small sun burning inside the dashboard, a permanent warning that everything was about to break. She drank the cold coffee. It tasted like burnt rubber and regret. The diner's door chimed at 3:51 a.m. A man in a wrinkled suit entered, walked to the counter, ordered black coffee without looking at anyone, and sat at the opposite end of the diner. Allara did not look at him. She had learned the art of invisibility in poverty. You did not make eye contact. You did not take up space. You became a shadow that people's eyes slid across without seeing. At 4:13 a.m., she gathered her things, a cardigan so threadbare the elbows were transparent, a purse containing her work shoes and 3 protein bars she had stolen from the hotel's room service pantry, and left 2 of her 3 remaining dollar bills on the table. She needed the 73 cents for bus fare. The August heat hit her like a physical force the moment she stepped outside. The night air was thick and wet, heavy with moisture that made breathing feel like drowning in slow motion. Above, the sky was churning gray, and the wind carried the smell of distant rain. She could taste it, electricity and water pressure, the distinctive metallic tang of an approaching storm. The bus arrived at 4:14 a.m., 2 minutes early, a small mercy. She boarded and sat by the window as the streets of New York rolled past, abandoned storefronts with soap-covered windows, homeless encampments in doorways, a cat picking through an overturned trash can. The bus driver was a woman about her age, maybe younger, with braids and nails painted bright red, and Allara wondered what choices that woman had made that were different from her own, what luck or family money or education or simple cosmic fortune had placed her in the position of someone with employment instead of desperation. She arrived at Pinnacle Delivery Services at 4:22 a.m., 6 minutes late. The manager, a man named Derek with a clipboard and a permanent scowl, did not say anything about the lateness. He never did. Tardiness cost her 90 minutes of pay, and he knew she would not complain because she needed the job more than she needed pride. The truck was in Bay 7, a 2008 Ford with dents in the side and a crack in the windshield that branched like a lightning bolt from the top right corner. She did a pre-drive inspection, checked the mirrors, test the brakes, look for obvious leaks, and found everything exactly as it had been yesterday. Functional. Barely. The truck smelled like old upholstery and stale air freshener shaped like a pine tree that had lost its scent years ago. She loaded the first 147 packages into the cargo area, organized by delivery zone, by time windows, by the precise choreography of logistics that allowed the modern world to believe packages could simply materialize at doorsteps through magic instead of through exhaustion and human effort. The boxes were labeled with names like Romano, Langford, Berkshire, Thompson, names that belonged to addresses in Manhattan, to penthouses and brownstones and buildings where the doorman knew all the residents by name. By 5:51 a.m., the truck was loaded and the storm clouds were darker now, purple-gray and heavy. The weather report on the truck's radio said severe thunderstorm warning issued until 8 p.m., heavy rain expected, possible flash flooding on elevated roadways. She drove north on the FDR Drive toward the Triborough Bridge, where the first delivery zone began. The sky was opening now, not just threatening but actually opening, rain falling so hard the windshield wipers could barely keep pace. The truck felt heavy in the storm, buffeted by wind, slipping slightly on the wet asphalt. She had driven in rain before, rain in the city was unavoidable, but this storm had teeth. It had intention. It felt like the sky was trying to wash everything away, including her. The delivery to the Manhattan addresses would take 3 hours. Then the Bronx routes. Then back to the office by 1:15 p.m. Then home to change clothes for the 2 p.m. hotel shift that would run until midnight. Then back to the diner at 3 a.m. with $2.73 and the weight of $4,800 and $65,000 and the knowledge that in 5 days her daughter might be dead. The highway overpass at mile marker 17 was where it happened. The rain had intensified to something biblical, sheets of water falling at such angles the truck seemed to be driving underwater. The engine, which had been making a grinding sound all morning that she had been deliberately ignoring, made a new sound. A sharper sound. A sound like something fundamental breaking. The engine seized. The truck lurched. The check engine light on the dashboard blazed so bright it cast shadows on her face. She gripped the steering wheel and guided the dying truck toward the shoulder, away from the traffic lanes where she might be hit by a car she couldn't see through this rain. The truck rolled to a stop on the right shoulder of the northbound FDR, hazard lights blinking weakly. She sat there with her hands gripping the wheel, breathing, waiting for her heart to stop attacking her ribs. The rain drummed on the truck's roof like 10,000 angry fingers. She had no cell phone signal. She had no money for a tow truck, which would cost at least $100 even before they fixed whatever had just broken. She had no idea what she was going to do. 20 minutes passed. 20 minutes of sitting in the dead truck while cars sprayed her with highway runoff and the storm raged against the windows. She was calculating the cost in her head. A tow truck would destroy her ability to pay rent. A repair would cost more than she made in a month. She could not afford this. She could not afford any of this. Then headlights appeared through the rain. Not one car but 3 black SUVs moving in perfect formation, like sharks cut through the dark water of the storm. They did not slow to rubberneck or pass. They slowed to stop. The lead vehicle pulled directly behind her truck, and the rear passenger door opened. A man stepped out. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Somewhere in his late 40s or early 50s, with dark hair silvered at the temples and a scar running from his left eye to his cheekbone like a map of something violent. He wore a charcoal suit that fit his body with obvious expense, and a white shirt unbuttoned at the collar showing the muscular hollow of his throat. When he moved with the kind of deliberate control that suggested every motion had been chosen specifically, that nothing was accidental. He approached her truck and tapped on the window. Allara's immediate instinct was fear. 3 black SUVs on a deserted highway at dawn did not mean safety. 3 black SUVs meant something else entirely, something that lived in darker corners of the city. She rolled down the window 3 inches. The rain came in sideways, soaking her shoulder. "Your truck is not starting," the man said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, with an accent that belonged somewhere in the Mediterranean, Italy maybe, though she couldn't place it exactly. "You are alone. It is dark. It is raining. You are wet. You need help." There was no mercy in his voice, but there was also no cruelty. He was simply stating facts the way the cardiologist had stated the facts of her daughter's failing heart. These were conditions. This was reality. These were the equations that must be solved. "I don't have money to pay for a tow," Allara said. Her voice came out small, like something trapped. He did not respond. Instead, he turned and gestured, a small movement of his hand. A second vehicle pulled forward. 2 men emerged, moving with practiced efficiency, assessing the truck with the precision of soldiers evaluating a battlefield. They hooked it up without speaking to her, without asking permission, as if her situation had already been decided by forces beyond her control. "Get in," the man said. The second SUV pulled open and a third man appeared, reaching toward her with a towel and a bottle of water and an expression of perfect blank professionalism. She took the towel and dried her face and her arms, aware of how she must look, soaked through, terrified, wearing clothes that cost less than a single button on his suit jacket. "I don't even know you," Allara said. "No," he agreed, patient as stone. "You don't. But my name is Nicholas Romano. And in a few hours, you will understand why that matters. He did not explain further. He did not try to reassure her. He simply waited while she gathered her belongings, her cardigan, her purse, the delivery manifest she would have to explain, and moved into the warmth of his vehicle, out of the rain, into something she could not have predicted. The vehicle pulled onto the highway. The storm continued its assault on the windows, but inside, she was dry and warm, and for the first time in weeks, she was not completely alone. The rain hammered against the windows of the black SUV as it cut through the Westchester darkness, and inside that vehicle, Allara Bennett sat trembling in clothes that were still wet, still clinging to her skin like a second memory of everything she'd lost. The dashboard clock read 11:53 p.m. Nicholas Romano sat across from her in the back seat, and he was not speaking. He was simply watching her the way a general surveys a battlefield after the smoke clears, assessing, calculating, deciding what comes next. The silence stretched between them like a blade wrapped in ice. "I don't know how to thank you," Allara said finally, her voice barely a whisper. "The truck repair. The tow. You didn't have to." "I did," Romano said. His voice was deep and solid like an oath, the kind of voice that makes men move without question. He was in his late 40s, silver threading through his dark hair, wearing a suit that cost more than everything she owned combined. A thin scar ran from the corner of his right eye to his cheekbone, a permanent reminder that this man had survived things most people could not imagine. When someone is drowning, you throw them a rope. It's not charity. It's simple arithmetic. "But I can't repay you," Allara said. "I'm not asking you to." The SUV pulled into her neighborhood in the Bronx. The streets here were different, narrower, darker, lined with buildings that looked like they might collapse if the wind blew hard enough. This was her world. Cracked pavement. Flickering streetlights. The smell of fried food and desperation hanging in the August air. Romano's men, Rocco and Enzo, she would learn their names were, escorted her to her apartment building's entrance. Before she left the vehicle, Romano handed her a card. Ivory cardstock. A single phone number embossed in gold. "If you need anything else," he said, "call this." She took it with shaking hands and stumbled out into the humid night. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Rocco, his Brooklyn accent thick and businesslike. "Mr. Romano needs housekeeping staff at his estate. 20 hours a week. $35 an hour. You interested? $700 weekly. $2,800 monthly. Rent for Ava. Food. Medicine. Maybe, just maybe, a down payment toward the surgery that would save her daughter's life." "Yes," Allara said. "Yes, I'm interested." The estate in Westchester rose from the manicured grounds like a monument to old money, stone walls, iron gates, a circular driveway lined with maple trees that must have been planted decades ago. Allara arrived on a Monday morning wearing the black and white maid's uniform the agency provided, her hair pulled back so tightly it gave her a headache, her eyes fixed on the ground as she'd been trained to do. Invisible. Silent. A ghost in service. Mrs. Chen, the head housekeeper, was a woman in her 60s who looked like she had never smiled and never would. She gave Allara the rules in a voice like granite: clean the West Wing offices. Polish the library. The sitting rooms. You do not go to the 3rd floor East Wing. You do not speak unless spoken to. Mr. Romano values silence. For 3 days, Allara worked like a machine. She polished mahogany banisters. She dusted leather-bound books that she was too tired to read. She mopped marble floors so reflective she could see her own exhausted face looking back at her, a woman in her 20s who looked decades older, who had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight, who counted every dollar like it might be her last. On the 3rd evening, she was cleaning the library at 6 p.m. when Nicholas Romano walked in. She froze. The dust cloth fell from her hands. She stammered an apology, began to move toward the door, but he raised a hand. "Continue your work," he said. He settled into a leather chair with a glass of amber whiskey and opened a file folder, reading in silence while she trembled and tried to make her movement small and invisible. The rain outside the library window sounded like applause against the glass. "How is your daughter?" he asked without looking up. Allara's hand stopped moving. Her breath caught. She didn't know how he knew about Ava. The question hung in the air like a threat. "She's 6, Allara said slowly. "She has a congenital heart condition. She needs valve replacement surgery." "How much?" $65,000. Romano finally looked at her. His eyes were storm gray, and they contained something she couldn't identify, not pity, but maybe recognition. "When?" 5 days. "The hospital said if we don't schedule it within 5 days, her condition will deteriorate past the point where surgery can help." Her voice cracked on the last word. She was $56,800 short. The hospital had rejected her payment plan. She had $8,200 in the world, saved dollar by dollar through shifts that bent her spine and dried out her voice. Romano stood and walked to his desk. He pulled out a checkbook. The pen moved across the paper for 3 seconds. He tore out the check and handed it to her. $65,000. Allara stared at it like it might burn her. "No," she said. "I can't. I won't." "What do you want?" "What's the price?" "I want your daughter to live," Romano said. "That's the price. And the payment is due now, not later." She backed away from the check, from him, from this thing she didn't understand and couldn't accept. She left the library with her hands empty and her heart screaming. That night, in Romano's office on the 2nd floor, Rocco and Enzo stood in stunned silence. Rocco was barrel-chested, scarred across his knuckles from decades of enforcing his boss's will. Enzo was leaner, younger, sharper, the kind of man who noticed everything. "Boss," Rocco said finally, "in 15 years I've never seen you like this. You don't write checks for strangers. You don't stop for people on highways. What's happening?" Romano stood at the window, staring at the dark grounds. Behind him, somewhere on the 3rd floor east wing, was a door that had been locked for 23 years. Inside was a nursery. Pink walls. An empty crib. A mobile that hung frozen in perpetual silence. "Elena would be 23 now," he said quietly. "My daughter. She was stillborn. Maria, my wife, never recovered from it. She died 7 years later just from the weight of that grief." He turned to face his men. "Ava is 6 years old. The same age Elena would have been." Enzo's voice was soft. "You're trying to save the daughter you couldn't save." Romano didn't answer. He simply poured another glass of whiskey and drank it in one motion. 2 blocks away, in Allara's apartment building, Tyler Brennan knocked on her door at 7 p.m. He was 62 years old and owned half the condemned buildings in the Bronx through shell corporations that had shell corporations. His hands were liver-spotted. His teeth were yellow. His suit was cheap wool that couldn't hide the predatory hunger beneath it. Allara opened the door just a crack. Ava was sleeping inside, the soft sound of her breathing barely audible over the building's creaking pipes. "I know you got a job somewhere fancy," Tyler said. His voice was like gravel mixed with cigarette smoke. "That's real nice, sweetheart. But rent is due tomorrow. All $4,800. "I have most of it," Allara said. "I can have it all by the end of the week." His hand moved toward her waist. His fingers were cold. She shoved him back hard enough that he stumbled into the hallway wall. He smiled. "You got 3 days, or I file eviction papers." "And you know what comes after eviction?" "Child services. 6-year-old kid with a sick heart and a mother who can't keep a roof over her head. They don't even slow down. They just take her." He walked down the stairs whistling, and Allara stood in the doorway shaking, one hand pressed against her mouth to keep from screaming. Meanwhile, At a charity gala in Manhattan, Sophie Langford overheard two of Romano's business associates talking at the bar. Sophie was 34, blonde, beautiful, and possessed the particular cruelty that only old money could afford. She'd been waiting for years to hurt Nicholas Romano, ever since he'd humiliated her at a fundraiser by walking away mid-conversation like she was nothing. Now, two men were discussing his new maid. His sick daughter. His sudden, inexplicable softness. Sophie's red lips curved into a smile. She made a phone call to her private investigator. I want everything. Names, addresses, debts, weaknesses. I want to know what makes this girl scream. 3 blocks away, in the darkness of his mansion, Nicholas Romano stood in the locked nursery on the 3rd floor east wing, staring at an empty crib and understanding, finally, that some debts cannot be paid with money alone. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. The parking lot of St. Mary's Hospital was empty except for Allara Bennett's borrowed Honda and the October wind that cut across the asphalt like a blade wrapped in ice. Ava had finished her pre-surgery checkup. The cardiologist's words still echoed in Allara's mind, the operation is scheduled for 72 hours from now. Her heart is holding, but barely. Allara sat in the driver's seat with her hand shaking on the steering wheel when a woman in a cream-colored coat approached the car. Sophie Langford was 34 years old, blonde, with the kind of beauty that money buys and cruelty perfects. Her heels clicked against the concrete as she moved. She bent down to the passenger window, and Allara rolled it down, confusion flooding her face. Allara Bennett. Sophie's voice was silk wrapped around a knife. I thought that was you. I'm Sophie Langford. A friend of Nicholas Romano's. Allara's stomach tightened. I don't know what you. Yes, you do. Sophie smiled, and it never reached her eyes. You've been staying at his mansion. Cleaning his rooms. Sleeping under his roof. Ava is still alive because he decided to care about you. Sophie leaned against the car door, studying Allara like she was studying a painting in a gallery. That softness he has shown you? Men like Nicholas don't have softness in their nature. They have only power and appetite. And when the appetite is satisfied, he will discard you. Allara tried to close the window, but Sophie's hand was there, smooth and manicured. The gesture was casual and terrifying. There are families in this city who would hurt you just to hurt him, Sophie continued. The Costillanos. The Moretti crew. Any one of them would take Ava from the hospital bed and use her tiny, sick body as leverage against Nicholas Romano. You know this, don't you? You've already thought of it. Sophie opened the passenger door and placed a phone on the seat, a cheap burner with no markings. When you're ready to disappear, call this number. I will arrange relocation. I will fund Ava's surgery myself. $50,000, transferred immediately. All you have to do is leave New York before your daughter becomes a casualty of a war she didn't start. Why would you? Because I'm a good person who sees tragedy. Sophie's teeth were very white. And because men like Nicholas deserve to lose everything they love. When you're gone, he'll understand the price of his weakness. Sophie straightened, adjusting her coat. You have until tomorrow night. After that, the offer disappears, and so does your protection. She walked back to her car, a silver Mercedes that reflected the hospital lights like a mirror. Allara sat frozen, the burner phone heavy as a stone in her lap. She thought of Ava upstairs in the pediatric ward, of her daughter's fragile heart, of the surgery that was impossible without money Allara didn't have. That night, when Allara returned to her apartment building with Ava asleep against her shoulder, Tyler Brennan was waiting in the alley. He leaned against the brick wall, a bottle of whiskey dangling from his right hand. His eyes were the color of infected meat. Been looking for you, he said. Allara's hand tightened on Ava's small back. Mr. Brennan, I don't have time for this. I need to get her inside. Rent is due tomorrow. His voice scraped like a shovel on concrete. All $4,800. And I hear you got a fancy new boyfriend. That fancy boyfriend paying your bills, sweetheart. I'll have the money. You've been saying that for 6 months. Tyler stepped away from the wall, unsteady but deliberate. Mrs. Chen downstairs told me she saw you coming out of a black SUV. Said the man driving looked expensive. He laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You whoring yourself out to some businessman? That's one way to solve financial problems, I guess. Allara turned toward the apartment door, but Tyler grabbed her elbow. His grip was bone-crushing. She jerked away, and he stumbled forward, recovering quickly. Send the kid upstairs, he said. No. Send her upstairs, or I drag you both down to the street. Allara's hands were shaking so badly she could barely knock on Mrs. Chen's door. When it opened, she pressed Ava gently into the older woman's arms. Stay inside. Lock the door. She turned back to the alley and closed the door behind her. Tyler was standing in the center of the narrow passage, swaying slightly, his smile vicious. Now we can talk about what you owe me. His hand came up and grabbed her face, his palm covering her mouth and nose. She couldn't breathe. He slammed her backward against the brick wall. Her skull cracked against concrete. Stars exploded across her vision. You think you're better than me now? His breath was a furnace of whiskey and cigarettes. You think some rich man makes you special? You're a maid. You're nothing. You'll always be nothing. He released her mouth only to backhand her across the face. Her lips split. She tasted blood, copper, and salt, filling her mouth. She fought back, her nails finding his cheek, dragging down. He screamed and cocked his fist for another blow. Headlights flooded the alley in a sudden white wall. 3 black SUVs materialized out of the October darkness in perfect formation. They stopped. Doors opened. Men stepped out, not in hurried motion but in measured, deliberate steps. Rocco came first, then Enzo, then 2 others Allara recognized from the mansion. Behind them came Nicholas Romano. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than everything Allara had ever owned. His overcoat was cashmere, draped across his shoulders like the cloak of a general surveying a battlefield. His eyes were storm gray and absolutely still. He looked at Tyler Brennan the way a man looks at something he's about to erase from existence. Step away from her, Romano said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be loud. It was solid as concrete, final as a funeral bell. Tyler released Allara and stumbled backward, suddenly sober. Mr. Romano, this is personal business, between me and my tenant. You are a man who hits women. Romano did not move. You are a man who uses financial desperation as a weapon. You are a man who would threaten a child to control her mother. He turned to Rocco and Enzo. Remove him. They moved like ghosts, like shadows that had learned to walk. Tyler tried to run. He made it 3 steps before they caught him. They did not punch him or drag him. They simply held him, immobile, while Romano approached and looked directly into his eyes. You will never touch her again, Romano said. You will never contact her again. You will never send anyone to contact her on your behalf. Disappear from New York. Leave within the hour. If I ever hear your name again, if I ever see evidence that you remained, the people who take you next will not be as merciful as I am being now. He nodded to Rocco and Enzo. They pulled Tyler toward one of the black SUVs. He screamed. The sound echoed off the buildings like the cry of a caged animal. The van door slammed, and the convoy disappeared into the darkness. Allara stood alone in the alley, her lips split, her face swelling. She could hear her own heartbeat, fast and frantic. She climbed the stairs to Mrs. Chen's apartment. Ava was asleep on the couch, her small chest rising and falling. Allara held her daughter and did not cry. Hours later, in Romano's mansion, in the guest room where she had been staying, Allara sat at a small desk and opened a letter. Her hand shook as she wrote. I'm writing this letter so you'll understand why I had to disappear. Because loving you means keeping you alive. She wrote about Sophie's warning. About the families who would use Ava as leverage. About Tyler's violence and what it meant. About how her proximity to Nicholas Romano was poison, how every moment she remained was another moment her daughter was in danger. She wrote about calling Sophie, about accepting relocation, about leaving after Ava's surgery, if there was any way, any miracle, to make the surgery happen. She folded the letter and sealed it. The clock on the wall read 3:22 in the morning. Meanwhile, in his office on the second floor, Nicholas Romano watched security footage on a monitor. He could see Allara in the guest room. He could see her hands trembling as she wrote. He could read the first line of her letter reflected in the camera's feed. "I'm writing this letter so you'll understand why I had to disappear." He turned to Rocco and Enzo, who stood waiting by the fireplace. "Tell me about Sophie Langford's foundation." Rocco opened a folder. The Langford Charitable Trust. On paper, fund scholarships and youth programs. In reality, a shell company routing money through offshore accounts. We traced the money backward. It connects to the Castellano family. They've been using her foundation as a front. And Tyler Brennan? Romano asked. Money launderer, Enzo said. He's been stealing from Castellano operations while skimming from his tenants. The Costianos don't know yet, but when they do, he's dead. They'll handle it themselves. Romano stood. He walked to the window and looked out at the city lights reflecting off the Hudson River. Somewhere in a hospital, a 6-year-old girl was sleeping. Her heart was failing. Her mother was about to abandon her to protect her. He turned back to his men. I want Tyler Brennan delivered to the Castellano family by dawn. Wrapped in evidence that he's been stealing from them. Let them kill their own trash. He paused. And Sophie Langford. I want a warrant executed on her foundation at dawn. FBI forensic accountants. I want every shell company exposed. I want her assets frozen, her accounts seized, her family destroyed. She wanted to play in my world. Show her the price. Rocco and Enzo exchanged a look they had exchanged 1,000 times before, the look of men who understood that mercy and cruelty lived in the same man, and that today they were witnessing the cruelty. It will be done, Rocco said. They left the office. Romano remained at the window, watching the city sleep below him, understanding finally that some debts cannot be paid with money alone. The letter sat unfinished on the mahogany desk in the library, pen suspended above cream-colored paper like a blade about to fall. Allara's hand trembled as she forced the words onto the page, each letter a small death, each sentence another step toward the door she would walk through before dawn broke over the city. I'm writing this letter so you'll understand why I had to disappear, she whispered, reading the words aloud as if speaking them into existence would make them true. Because loving you means keeping you alive. The mansion was silent except for the grandfather clock in the foyer marking 4:41 in the morning. In her hospital room 3 miles away, Ava slept with medical monitors tracking the failing rhythm of her heart. Surgery was scheduled for tomorrow. The $65,000 they needed still didn't exist in any form that made sense. Allara's fingers moved across the paper with the precision of someone writing her own execution order. I don't know how or when it happened, but somewhere between the highway shoulder and this library, I stopped seeing the most feared man in New York and started seeing the man who saved a stranger in the rain. Who keeps a nursery locked upstairs because the grief is too sacred to disturb? Who offered my daughter life when he didn't have to? Her voice caught. She kept writing. You scare me. Not because of what you are, but because of what I feel. And that feeling will get Ava killed. The words were true and they were lies, the way all desperate choices are both at once. Your enemies are already circling. I won't let her pay for my weakness. The hospital accepted a payment plan. I lied about having resources, but I'll figure it out somehow. By the time you read this, we'll be gone. Thank you for everything. Forgive me for leaving. She signed it simply. A. She folded the letter twice, placed it on the desk's edge where he would find it, and picked up the single canvas bag containing everything she and Ava owned that mattered. The foreclosure notice was tucked into her jacket pocket, a permanent reminder of how small a person could make herself if they tried hard enough. The hallway stretched before her like a throat she had to swallow through. Every step toward the foyer felt like stepping through someone else's life, a life she had borrowed but never truly inhabited. The grand staircase descended into darkness. At the bottom, the front doors rose like the gates of a fortress she was escaping. She reached the foyer's cold marble floor and froze. Nicholas Romano stood waiting in the shadows near the entrance, the letter open in his hands. His dark eyes moved from the page to her face, and in that moment she understood that some walls cannot be crossed undetected, that leaving silently is its own kind of theft. He wore a charcoal suit and nothing else, no coat, no armor but the authority that lived in his bones. His voice when he spoke was quiet, which made it more dangerous than any shout could have been. "You think leaving protects her?" Allara's breath fractured. She couldn't lie to him now. The letter had already done that work. "Staying kills her," she said, her voice breaking like dropped glass. "I saw what Tyler became. I heard Sophie's warnings. I'm nobody, and being near you paints targets on nobodies." Romano stepped toward her, his movements measured and deliberate. The distance between them closed like a wound closing. When he spoke again, each word fell like a hammer strike. "Tyler Brennan is gone. Sophie Langford is in federal custody as of 3 hours ago. Every person who threatened you no longer exists in any position to do harm." He paused. "You weren't bait, Allara. You were under protection, whether you accepted it or not. You can't just erase people," she whispered. "I can," he said. "I did. And I'll do it again for anyone who threatens what I've chosen to protect." The weight of chosen settled between them like snow. She understood what he meant. It wasn't about power. It was about selection. About looking at someone broken on the side of the highway and deciding they were worth the cost. "Why?" Allara asked. "Why her? Why me? Why any of this?" Romano lowered the letter. His eyes held something ancient and wounded, something that had been locked away as carefully as the nursery on the 3rd floor. "Because 23 years ago I stood in a hospital room holding a daughter who never took a breath, and I couldn't save her? Because I've spent 2 decades building power that couldn't save the one person who mattered? Because when I saw you on that highway with nothing but determination to survive, I saw a chance to make different choices." Allara felt the ground shift beneath her. She thought of the words in the letter, the ones she hadn't finished writing, the ones that said what she couldn't say aloud. "The letter said I love you," she whispered. "You weren't supposed to read that part." "I read it all," Romano said. "And I'm choosing not to let you disappear." He extended his hand, and she took it. Not as submission but as equal choice. The bag fell from her shoulder. She didn't pick it up. At 6:14 the next morning, Allara sat in the hospital's waiting room holding Ava's tiny hand. The pre-surgery paperwork listed an anonymous donor for the full $65,000 surgical cost. The valve replacement was scheduled for 7:30. In the hallway, Romano stood at the window watching but not intruding, giving her this moment while ensuring she would never face another alone. Ava looked up at her with eyes too wise for a 6-year-old, eyes that had already learned what pain meant. "Mama, will it hurt?" Ava asked. "No, baby. They'll give you medicine that makes you sleep. When you wake up, your heart will be strong." Allara squeezed her small fingers. "Strong enough to do anything." The surgical team came. Allara walked beside the gurney until the double doors, then turned away as her daughter disappeared into the operating room. Her knees buckled. Romano's hand found her back without her having to ask. Rocco appeared with coffee that neither of them would drink. 6 hours and 23 minutes later, the surgeon emerged still wearing the blue mask pulled down around her neck, and her expression carried the answer before her words did. The valve replacement was successful. Ava's heart would function normally now. Full recovery was expected. Full recovery. Allara collapsed into a plastic chair and wept. Not the careful tears of someone with dignity left to protect, but the shattering sobs of someone whose worst fear had been denied entry. Romano's hand settled on her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. For the first time in months, she didn't calculate the cost of allowing someone to touch her. A week later, when Ava was resting safely at home, Romano asked Allara to follow him to the third-floor east wing. The hallway she had never walked. The door that never opened. He unlocked it with a key she'd never seen him use. The nursery was exactly as grief demands, frozen in time, suspended in amber. Pink walls the color of infant skin. A white crib with mobile of silver stars hanging motionless above it. Above the changing table, a name painted in careful script, Elena Marie Romano. Dust covered everything like snow that had never melted. I kept it locked because letting go meant admitting she was gone, Romano said, his voice raw as exposed wound. That I failed. Allara stepped inside carefully, as if sudden movement might shatter the fragile preservation of pain. She touched the crib's rail, and dust rose into the light. You didn't fail, she said quietly. You loved her. Love doesn't fail just because it doesn't save. She watched understanding settle across his face, watched something locked inside him finally find a place to rest. I want to convert this room, he said after a long silence. Turn it into something living. Maybe a playroom for Ava when she's strong enough to visit. Not erasing Elena. Allowing life to exist alongside grief. Together they began the work of dismantling the crib, and with each piece removed, the room transformed. The act was both painful and liberating, the way all true healing is. 3 months later, the mansion had changed into something unrecognizable. Ava ran through the gardens with her laughter filling spaces that had been silent for decades. Her scarred chest was hidden beneath a pink dress, her heart beating strong beneath fabric and skin. Allara walked beside her, no longer wearing the maid's uniform but professional clothing, the estate manager now, working alongside Romano's legitimate business operations. The nursery was now a library-playroom hybrid. Elena's name remained painted on the wall, but surrounded by children's books and art supplies, a memorial that breathed. In the gardens at sunset, Allara and Romano stood watching Ava chase butterflies through the flowers. Do you have regrets? Allara asked him. About everything that happened. Romano watched his daughter run, her movements already stronger, already free. When he answered, his voice carried the weight of decades finally set down. I regret the years I wasted believing power meant isolation. I don't regret finding you on that highway. I don't regret the choices I made to keep you safe. I don't regret any of this. Allara turned to him. Sophie said men like you don't save people. That you own them. Romano took her hand, not as possession but as choice made visible. Sophie was wrong. I don't want to own you, Allara. I want to stand beside you. If you'll allow it. She squeezed his hand in answer, and he understood. Family is not always bound by blood but by those who choose to stay when the storm arrives. Nicholas Romano found Allara Bennett broken down in the rain and chose protection over indifference. Allara chose trust over fear. And together they chose to build something neither could have built alone, a future where the ghosts could finally rest and the living could finally breathe. If this story moved your heart, hit that like button right now and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Subscribe to this channel because tomorrow we're bringing you another story of unlikely family, fierce protection, and the price of choosing love over isolation. Drop a comment telling us, have you ever had a stranger change your life? We'll see you in the next one.